You slip into the video the way you slip into the last 10 minutes of your day. Half here, half already drifting somewhere softer. Outside your window, the world is still buzzing. Notifications still flare up like tiny emergencies, and your brain is busy replaying every awkward moment from the last 12 hours on a cruel little loop. Underneath all that, though, something gentler begins to ring at the edges of your attention. A faint, silvery chime echoing from somewhere high and cold, as if the night itself is wearing a necklace of little bells. Behind your closed eyes, the first shapes of a landscape begin to form. You see steep Alpine slopes folded into deep green ridges and dusted with the last streaks of snow. The air is thin and sharp, the kind that would sting your lungs but clear your thoughts. A pale mist hangs over the grass, softening the edges of rocks and trees. You are still lying wherever you are in real life, but another version of you is standing on a hillside that smells of clover, moss, and distant wood smoke. Your body has been filing complaints all week. Your shoulders ache from hunching over screens, your eyes burn, your mind is basically a browser with 147 tabs open, most of them frozen. Realistically, you probably won't survive this pace for very long if you don't learn to close a few of those tabs. For tonight, you let them go. You let the cowbells have you instead. Let their patient rhythm guide you out of your own century for a while. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and let me know how your day has really been. Your worries, your exhaustion, or even a tiny joy that made you smile. I'm here to truly listen and offer the most sincere, heartfelt advice I can. Now, turn off the lights. Take a deep, slow breath. Let your tiredness melt away and gently close your eyes. Let's drift together into tonight's dreamlike lands. And tomorrow morning, if you still remember, send me a message and tell me what you dreamed. As those words fade, the brightness of your room softens, as if someone gently turns down the contrast on reality. The familiar outlines of furniture and walls blur, then slip away altogether. Above you, another ceiling appears. Not plaster, not paint, but a wide, darkening sky. It is evening in the Alps now. The last wash of gold is draining from the jagged mountain crests, leaving behind deep bands of indigo and violet like bruises on the horizon where the sun has pressed all day. You stand on a narrow shelf of earth that juts from the slope, the ground springy beneath your feet. Far below, the valley is already turning to ink, rivers stretching the leftover daylight into thin silver lines. Along their banks, the medieval village gathers itself for night. Roofs close together, thin smoke rising, faint orange glows blooming in windows and doorways. Up here on the high pasture, the sound that called you here becomes clear. The cowbells are not frantic alarms. They do not job at your nerves the way your phone does. Each note is the length of an easy breath. A head lowers, grass rustles, metal rings once, twice, and then rests. Little by little, the slow looping pattern settles into your chest, steady as a heart you can finally hear. You glance down at the trail and see how far you have stepped from your own age. No asphalt, no concrete, not even neat gravel. Only a dark ribbon of earth pressed flat by hooves and boots. A fence of rough-hewn posts and rails keeps the herd from the steeper drop, the wood bleached and smoothed by weather and hands that have opened the same gate every day of their lives. From the valley, a deeper bell tolls the hour from a small stone tower. Its low note climbs the slope in a long, calm wave and meets the lighter chiming of the cowbells. Time rearranges itself around that sound. Your neat, crowded schedules feel like scraps of paper that would not last a single gust up here. The only timetable is the fading sky and the quiet drift of animals toward rest. You breathe in the chill and taste cooling rock, damp soil, the faint sweetness of crushed grass. You breathe out, and something knotted inside you loosens. It drops, softly as if set down on the pasture, joining all the invisible worries shed here by people long before you. The bells go on, patient and unhurried, and with each slow step you feel yourself drawn further upward, following their music toward the heart of the medieval pasture waiting in the dusk. You begin to notice how the slope itself feels like a long, slow exhale. The earth rises gently at first, then steeper, as if the mountain is stretching out after a long day. Each step you take presses a small, damp print into the path, and for once you are not racing to beat a clock. There is no traffic jam here, no elevator chimes, no messages stacking up in glowing rectangles. There is only the uneven rhythm of your feet and the distant clink of metal on leather as the herd moves somewhere above. The path winds up from the valley in a series of patient curves, never in the straight, efficient line. It is not interested in your modern obsession with shortcuts. It sidesteps large stones and roots, skirts around patches of exposed rock, and offers you a route that countless feet have judged the safest compromise between effort and risk. Each bend feels like a small act of kindness from people you will never meet, who nonetheless bothered to tread and retread this way for years until it became gentle enough for tired bodies and heavy loads. Down below, the last sounds of the village start to recede. The sharp clatter of wheels over cobbles, the murmur of evening voices, the faint cry of chickens being gathered for the night. All of it turns thin and far away, like a memory fading at the edge of sleep. In their place, quieter layers of sound slide forward. You hear an unseen stream hurrying over stones, the soft hiss of wind combing through high grass, the occasional hollow clack of a small rock dislodged by your shoe and sent tumbling into the darkening undergrowth. The air grows cooler with every slow ascent. It brushes against your face, tasting faintly of iron from the exposed rock and of resin from conifers higher up the slope. When you inhale, your chest expands just a little more than it does at home, as if it has been waiting for something worth breathing in. Tiny pinpricks of cold dance along your arms where sweat from the climb meets the alpine chill. It is the kind of cold that wakes you up without making you tense, a reminder that your body is a simple, stubborn thing that just wants oxygen and a bit of honest effort. On one side of the path, the hillside rises into a jumble of boulders and tough grasses clinging stubbornly to cracks. On the other side, it drops away toward the valley, where strains of pale smoke rise like faint thoughts from the village chimneys. You can see the faint flicker of hearth fires through some windows, small, steady stars at human height. From up here, the place where you began already looks like a miniature, a toy world in a child's careful hands. Your own daily problems shrink at the same rate. The email you forgot to answer, the task you postponed, the awkward message left unread, they all look ridiculous at this altitude, flimsy as cobwebs stretched between two stones. The cowbells are closer now. Each one has its own voice, determined by size, shape, and the way it is hung from the leather strap. Some ring in bright, high notes, others resonate in mellow, rounded tones. Together, they form a constantly shifting pattern, like a theme played by many patient musicians who have absolutely no intention of hurrying the tempo for your benefit. You follow their scattered melody the way a sailor might follow a lighthouse beam, except your beacon is moving slowly across the slope, grazing as it goes. Here and there, the path passes by small signs of routine that do not belong to your world, but somehow feel more familiar than your calendar reminders. A patch of soil worn flat where someone always pauses to adjust a load. A stump polished to a smooth sheen by generations of resting backsides. A short, lopsided fence where tools lean at the end of the day. Shovel and rake and fork lined up like tired soldiers. No one is here now, yet the evidence of their daily repetition wraps around you like a quiet reassurance. This route is safe. This route is known. This route has carried tired people up and back for longer than you can imagine. The higher you climb, the more the sentry frays around the edges. There are no cables overhead, no hum of distant engines, no glow of a road cutting the valley. What little light remains comes from the sky, now deepening into a layered twilight. Soft violet near the horizon, drifting toward ink above. A star appears, then another, then a small cluster, until the heavens begin their slow, patient takeover of the night. You tilt your head back and feel the size of everything expand above you, and for once, it is not overwhelming. It just makes your own worries feel refreshingly tiny. Your legs burn a little, muscles complaining in that satisfying, useful way that promises sleep later, real sleep. Not the restless kind where your body lies flat, but your brain runs a full marathon through old conversations and imagined disasters. Up here, your inner commentator finally starts to get tired. It is hard to catastrophize when your lungs are busy and the ground demands just enough of your attention to stop you from wandering too far inside your own skull. You reach a small rise where the path widens, as if the mountain is offering you a pause. From this vantage, the valley floor has almost disappeared into shadow, while the higher ridges catch the last faint gray of the dying day. Somewhere just beyond the next slope, the cowbells continue their slow punctuation of the evening. You cannot see the herd yet, but their presence is undeniable, like a promise waiting just out of sight. Standing there, you realize that this climb is not just a path out of the valley, it's a path out of the frantic little maze of your own routines. Each step away from the village is a step away from the noise you have mistaken for necessity. Up here, the only urgent thing is the next breath, and the next sure place to put your foot. And as you move on, following the curve of the trail toward the sound of bells in the unseen meadow above, you feel for the first time in a while that you are finally moving in a direction that leads somewhere kinder. You do not remember when the climb ended and sleep began. At some forgotten curve in the path, the slope opened into a shallow, grassy hollow, soft enough that your tired body simply folded into it. Cowbells drifted above you in loose silver threads, stretching and thinning as your thoughts came undone. Somewhere between one distant chime and the next, your worries lost their grip. Your century loosened its hold, and you slipped down into a dark, uncomplicated quiet. When you surface again, the world has changed temperature and color. Night's black has melted into a pale, undecided gray, as if the sky is still thinking about whether it wants to be day. You lie on your back, clothes cold and damp with dew, feeling each blade of grass press lightly into your shoulders. The air you pull into your lungs is sharp enough to sting, but startlingly clean, rinsing out whatever stale thoughts were left over from yesterday. You push yourself upright and realize you are sitting in a bowl of mist. It pools low over the pasture, thick enough that rocks, shrubs, and tufts of grass blur at the edges like half-remembered dreams. Sound arrives softened, as if wrapped in wool. Then, from somewhere inside that cloudy whiteness, the cowbells begin again. Quieter than last night, less like a summons, more like a steady heartbeat. Each tone is slightly muffled, the damp air rounding its edges so that nothing startles, nothing rushes. Shapes move in the fog. At first they are simply darker patches in the pale, but gradually they resolve into broad backs, slow swinging heads, curved horns traced with beaded droplets. The herd has surrounded you during the night, drawn by the same level patch of grass that cradled your sleep. Their breath pours out in soft gusts, each exhale a brief cloud that rises and vanishes. Bells hang from worn leather straps at their necks, the metal dark and dulled, bright only where years of movement have polished the rims. You stand and brush off bits of leaf and grass, surprised by how calm you feel with so much weight moving around you. These animals are busy. They have a schedule that does not include worrying about you. Heads drop, jaws work, and the pasture shortens under their patient attention. Every shift of muscle sends a small ring into the mist, high, low, hollow, bright, like a slow, improvised choir. Compared to your usual morning alarm, which tries to yank your soul out through your ears, this rhythm feels almost embarrassingly humane. Beyond the nearest cattle, new figures slide out of the fog, the herders. Their shapes are compact and solid, wrapped in rough wool cloaks, trousers stiff with old stains of grass and mud. Boots sink easily into the damp ground, finding familiar footholds without hesitation. Their breath steams too, little plumes rising as they walk, but there is a different quality to their movement, purpose layered over habit, like a song sung so often that the words no longer need thinking. Wooden pails knock gently against legs, three-legged stools swing from hands, coils of rope hang from shoulders like domesticated serpents. They move among the herd with a quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly what needs to be done and exactly how long it will take. One of them stops beside a cow, sets down the stool, and folds into the same motion someone else did yesterday and the day before and 10 years before that. Hands find the udder without looking, fingers closing with practiced precision. The first pull sends a thin, bright stream of milk tapping into the empty pail, startlingly loud against the soft hush of fog and bells. Then another and another, until the brief, sharp splashes merge into a steady liquid rhythm. Foam gathers at the surface, white and fresh, trembling with each impact. The smell reaches you slowly. Warm milk, faintly sweet, braided with the heavier scent of hide, manure, damp wool, crushed grass, and cold stone. It is not glamorous. It is not Instagrammable. But it is real in a way that your usual breakfast, some combination of caffeine, sugar, and guilt, rarely manages. Here, nothing is pretending to be anything else. There is the animal, there is the person, there is the pail. And in the gap between them lies the simple, non-negotiable fact that if this work is not done, Someone goes hungry when winter closes its fist. As more pails fill, they are carried to a larger wooden tub set slightly apart on a flatter patch of ground. Warm milk sloshes as it is poured, sending up a faint steam that curls into the gray air and disappears. Somewhere higher on the slope, you hear the first crackle of a small fire catching, dry kindling snapping softly as flame takes hold. Already, the future is hidden in these ordinary gestures. Wheels of cheese aging in cool cellars, butter churned in heavy jars, bowls of hot milk cradled in numb fingers after a day spent wrestling with snow and ice. The fog thins by degrees. It lifts in torn strips, snagging on horns and fence posts before bleeding away. As it rises, more of the pasture emerges. The grass is cropped close and studded with tiny alpine flowers, most still closed against the chill, tight buds of purple and yellow and white. Hoof prints fill with shining water, turning the ground into a map of puddled mirrors. Beyond the herd, you catch glimpses of a timber structure, the low roof of a farmhouse or cowshed, its dark wood beaded with droplets, smoke breathing from a small stone chimney. You notice how everything here is marked by repetition, the same path from shed to herd beaten into the soil, the same circular patches where animals always pause, the same grooves worn into bucket handles by fingers that have gripped them through hundreds of cold dawns. It is not monotony, it is discipline, the kind that quietly keeps people alive. Your own days are full of variety and novelty and constant stimulation, and yet somehow you still end most evenings exhausted and weirdly empty. Up here, the tasks are few, but each one lands with weight and meaning. Without being told, your breathing begins to follow the pace of the pasture. Inhale with the arch of a stream of milk, exhale with the soft swing of a bell. Inhale with the lifting of fog, exhale with the slow shifting of bodies around you. Muscles in your neck, your jaw, the space between your eyebrows, places that have been clenched for months, start to loosen just a little. For a moment, you are not a job title, not a username, not a tangle of notifications. You are simply another warm, breathing thing in the cold morning air, sharing this fragile slice of time with animals and people who have no idea how strange your life usually is. The sun still hides behind the higher peaks, but its approach is written in the softening of the sky, in the way shadows grow less deep, in the faint silver edge appearing along distant ridges. The herders work without looking up. They already know what the light will do. Soon, pails will be emptied and rinsed, cows nudged toward fresher grass, bodies turned uphill to follow the day's slow climb. You will go with them, guided once more by the gentle clatter of bells, but for now, you linger at the edge of this milky, mist-wrapped morning, letting its quiet, practical grace soak slowly into your bones, like warmth into cold hands. You drift with the herd as it spreads slowly across the hillside, the urgent business of milking finished, the sharper chill of dawn softening into something almost gentle. Pails and stools have been carried back toward the shed, the clatter of work giving way to a looser, sprawling quiet. The cows move outward in a widening fan, heads down, bells sounding in a scattered, easy chorus. You follow at the edge of this living tide, not quite a worker, not quite a guest, just a tired soul being quietly carried along. From above, this pasture might look like a single green sheet thrown over the bones of the mountain. Up close, it is anything but simple. The ground beneath your boots changes every few steps. Springy moss, tough tufts of sedge, soft cropped patches that feel almost like a hand-brushed carpet. Tiny flowers colonize the small gaps between hooves and stones, painting the grass with flecks of yellow, purple, and stubborn white. This is not just land. It is a complicated agreement between soil, weather, plants, animals, and the people who insist on surviving here. Your eyes start to read the ground the way you usually read a screen. Hoof prints stamped the slope with information, deep, rounded impressions where heavy cows have trudged the same line day after day. Lighter, skittish stamps where calves danced in indecision. Narrow, sharp-edged marks where boots with hobnails gripped the wet turf. Here, the earth remembers who went where and how often and why. It is a history you can literally step into. As the sun lifts fully over the ridge, light spills into the valley in a slow, golden slide. Dew on the grass erupts into a million tiny mirrors, so that every step feels as if you are walking through a field of low stars. The flowers respond as if someone has quietly flipped their switch. Gentians uncurl into impossible fragments of sky blue. Edelweiss tucks soft silver petals against the stones, and tough little dandelions blaze defiantly, doing what dandelions do best, thriving exactly where they are not particularly cherished. Eventually, you see a more deliberate mark. A crooked line of stones, half sunk and moss-coated, winds across the meadow like the spine of some old beast. From a distance it looked like nothing at all, but standing here you can see how intentional it is. Each rock has been placed by a hand, nudged into just the right position to catch the eye without blocking anything larger than a boot. Cows step over it without thinking. Humans do not. On one side of this low, quiet barrier, the grass is shorter, smoother, clipped close by steady grazing. On the other side, it grows a little taller, humming with more flowers and insects. The difference is slight but undeniable, like the faint line where the edge of your phone screen ends and reality begins. You realize you are looking at a border, not between countries, not guarded by soldiers or laws written in heavy books, but between families, between grazing rights, between who may lead their herd where and for how long. You follow the stones for a while, letting them guide you along the curve of the hill. Every few dozen steps, a weathered wooden post stands beside the line, its top chewed by time and curious teeth. No paint, no labels, no threats about prosecution. The enforcement here is quieter, the shared memory of neighbors, the stories of old disputes everyone is tired of repeating, the understanding that if someone pushes too far, the pasture itself will tattle in thinning grass and hungry winters. At last, the stone line curves toward a cluster of buildings ahead. Dark timber walls, steep roofs, and a scatter of outbuildings knit themselves into the hillside as if grown from it. Smoke rises in a clean, thin ribbon from one chimney, and a faint smell of wood smoke and warm milk drifts on the air. You step across a patch where the grass becomes almost lawn smooth, trimmed not by aesthetics but by constant use, and you realize you have arrived at the place where all these flowers, footprints, and forgotten borders are woven together into a single lived-in center. The bells continue to ring behind you, steady and unbothered, as you turn your steps toward the timber-framed farmhouse and whatever warmth and stories it might hold. You cross that invisible threshold, where pasture turns into yard, the wild, uneven grass giving way to ground stamped flat by generations of feet. The farmhouse does not loom. It hunkers, low, broad, and patient, as if it has decided to survive here by staying close to the earth. Dark beams frame whitewashed walls, the timber joined with pegs instead of nails, each joint a small handshake between pieces of forest that now pretend to be house. The roof pitches steeply, ready to shed snow the way you swipe away notifications. Except this roof has to get it right every single time. The front step is just a heavy slab of stone sunk into the soil, its center worn to a shallow dip. Your boot slides comfortably into that hollow, following the ghost of hundreds of other feet that have paused here with full pails, tired shoulders, and small gossip that never made it into any chronicles. The wooden door is thick, its surface scarred by weather, tools, and the occasional impatient shoulder. When it opens, it does not hiss or click, it sighs, wood rubbing against wood in a sound as old as carpentry. Inside, the first thing that hits you is warmth. Not the dry, anonymous heat of climate control, but a layered warmth that seems to have accumulated over years like interest on a carefully tended account. It comes from the big open hearth at the center of the main room, where a steady fire burns low and red, not wasting itself in showy flames. Smoke curls up into a hooded chimney, leaving behind the rich smell of resin, charred bread crusts, and fats that have sputtered and dripped and hissed through countless meals. The ceiling feels low, because it is, beams running so close above your head that you instinctively duck. From them hangs the visible memory of summer. Bundles of herbs dry upside down, their leaves curled and crisping, thyme, sage, something sharper you can't quite place, but know would clear your head if steeped in hot water. Garlands of onions and garlic form braided chains along one beam, their papery skins whispering when a draft moves through. Closer to the door, strips of meat have been smoked to a dark, glossy toughness, waiting to be sliced thin on nights when the wind howls and the herd must be kept nearer the valley. Along one wall, wooden shelves hold a small army of clay pots and lidded crocks. Some are sealed with wax, others capped with cloth tied tightly in place. You know, in the vague way modern people know things from documentaries, that these vessels hide pickled vegetables, preserved fruits, maybe salted fish brought up from lower rivers during the brief, lush days of summer. Here, color and flavor have been coaxed into jars against the time when the world outside will turn monochrome and bitterly cold. There is no "we'll just order something later" option up here. Each jar is an argument against hunger, made months in advance. Then there are the cheeses. They dominate the far side of the room, stacked on rough wooden planks and cradled in their own small universe of scent. Some are pale and fresh, barely formed, still soft in the middle. Others have aged into firm, dense wheels, their rinds rough and dusted with a faint bloom that would terrify your inner food safety inspector, but delights the microscopic world that turns milk into something that will not betray you in February. The air near them is tangy, nutty, a little animal, a little cave-like. Each wheel began as one morning's labor in the pasture, like the one you just watched, a series of small, repeated gestures that, when added up, become survival. The floor under your feet is a patchwork of worn planks and beaten earth. It creaks in a way that tells you exactly where people like to stand. There is a smooth hollow in front of the long wooden table where chairs have scraped back, walked forward, scraped back again over years of meals. A darker polished streak leads from the door to the hearth, the obvious route for bringing in wood, water, and the day's worries to be melted down into something more manageable. Near the wall where tools hang, scythes, sickles, wooden rakes, the floor is scuffed and nicked, an unintentional map of every moment someone put something down a little too hard in frustration or leaned it there in bone-deep fatigue. Light enters through small windows set deep into the thick walls. Their glass is imperfect, bubbles and waves, turning the view outside into a softly distorted painting, a smear of green pasture, a vertical streak of fence post, the pale blur of sky. Sunbeams slice into the dim interior at an angle, picking up motes of dust, strands of steam, and the faint sheen on polished wood. In those illuminated shafts, you can almost see time itself, drifting slowly, unconcerned with your usual obsession over minutes and deadlines. You watch how the people in this house move through their space with unthinking precision. Hands reach for the exact hook where a ladle always hangs. Feet find the stable spot near the hearth without even a glance. A heavy iron pot swings on its chain above the coals, simmering something that smells of barley, root vegetables, and yesterday's bones given one last assignment. Milk from this morning has already found its way into a smaller pot, warming gently, being coaxed toward cream or curds by hands that know exactly when to stir and when to leave well enough alone. There is no recipe book here, no printed measurements, no kitchen scale sitting smugly on the counter. The knowledge lives in bodies, in how heavy the ladle feels when it has the right amount, in the way the surface looks when something is done, in the tang of air that tells you whether today's cheese will need a little more salt. You think of how often you second-guess your own choices, checking and rechecking, asking the internet, consulting comments. Up here, hesitation could spoil food, waste fuel, cost someone a meal. Confidence is not an optional self-help theme. It is a tool, like any other. In a corner near the door, you notice baskets and crates half-packed and waiting. Wheels of cheese are wrapped in cloth, small rounds nestled carefully against larger forms that will travel to the valley market. There are a few salt-curd meats strung and ready, their surfaces oiled to shine just enough under daylight to tempt a buyer. There are sacks of grain tied with cord, and bundles of herbs chosen for their value as medicine as much as flavor. This room is not just a kitchen. It is also a warehouse, a bank, a logistics hub, powered entirely by muscle and memory. You imagine a midwinter night here, snow pressed high against the walls, wind clawing at the shutters. In your mind's eye, the hearth burns brighter, and those pots and jars and wheels are no longer just rustic decor. They are the difference between going to bed with a full stomach or lying awake listening to hunger chew on the edges of your thoughts. Every action you've seen this morning, milking, carrying, stirring, hanging, suddenly feels heavier with meaning. This is what it looks like when a year is planned, not around project phases or fiscal quarters, but around the simple question, will there be enough when the grass disappears? The thought settles somewhere deep in you, quiet and persistent. Your own pantry may be a short walk from a 24-hour grocery, but your mind knows something about scarcity all the same. You hoard tasks, hoard worries, hoard little bits of attention until your inner shelves are a mess of half-open problems. In this farmhouse, every stored thing has a purpose and a season. Nothing is meant to be kept forever. Everything is meant to be used, transformed, and shared. It is a strangely comforting philosophy that feels more sustainable than the way you cling to every email and expectation. Outside, the cowbells ring again, rearranging themselves into a new pattern as the herd drifts toward fresh grazing. Somewhere in the yard, a cart creaks, leather harnesses squeak, and a wheel bumps over a stone. The house is shifting into departure mode, its carefully preserved wealth ready to roll downhill toward the market waiting in the valley below. You follow the sound of preparation the way you followed the path up from the valley, not in a rush, but with the quiet certainty that something is about to move. The yard outside the farmhouse has turned into a small, temporary loading dock. A cart stands with its shafts propped on a block of wood, wheels crusted with dried mud from countless trips. The wood of the frame is scarred and darkened by weather, but the metal bands around the wheel still catch the light in narrow, stubborn flashes. Leather harnesses lie coiled nearby, smelling of sweat, tallow, and rainstorms survived. Cheese wheels, meats, sacks, and bundles are lifted with the kind of care you usually reserve for delicate electronics. Here, the stakes are higher than cracked screens. Each piece has a place in the cart. Heavier wheels low and toward the center, smaller goods wedged carefully to stop them sliding, fragile jars tucked where jolts will be gentlest. It's an advanced game of Tetris, except the penalty for losing is not a high score disappearing, but dinner vanishing halfway through winter. You watch the choreography, hands and shoulders and backs moving in silent coordination, and realize this is what logistics looks like when the only algorithm is experience. When at last everything is tied down, ropes looped and knotted with brisk competence, the cart tips forward into the waiting harness. The animals chosen to pull it shift their weight, hooves scuffing the ground, bells chiming once in mild protest before settling into a new workday rhythm. The herd in the pasture looks up, some curious, some indifferent, their own bells answering in loose, overlapping notes. You take your place alongside, close enough to feel the cart's first jerks as it begins its descent, wood creaking in complaint that hides a deep trust in its own sturdiness. The path down from the farmhouse follows the line of least resistance, a downward echo of the climb you made from the valley. Only now, gravity is less your enemy and more your slightly overenthusiastic friend, nudging cart and bodies and thoughts downhill with gentle insistence. Stones that were merely obstacles on the way up become meaningful threats to wheel and axle. Every rut is a potential disaster if not anticipated. The people you walk with do not try to tame the mountain. They read it instead, angle, moisture, loose soil, and steer accordingly. As you descend, the smell of the pasture thins, replaced gradually by other scents drawn upward from the valley. Wood smoke grows stronger, blended with the sweet, almost burnt aroma of baking bread. Somewhere, someone is roasting meat. Fat sizzles, and the scent finds you on the breeze like a persuasive argument. You realize how rarely in your normal life you follow your nose anywhere. Most of your directions come from glowing arrows and blue dots on a map. Here, smell operates as its own kind of navigation, telling you that people, hunger, and trade are not far off. The soundscape shifts, too. The clear, open ringing of cowbells merges with duller, heavier clanks from other carts on other paths. Iron-shod wheels knock on stone, hooves drum in overlapping rhythms. Voices rise in a low general murmur that carries up the valley in broken waves. You can't make out words, but you don't need to. The tone is enough to tell you that today is something different from every other day, a market day, when isolation relaxes its grip and the valley briefly behaves like a single organism instead of scattered farms clinging to slopes. The village appears first as a dark knot at the river's edge, then slowly resolves into individual shapes. Roofs cluster tightly together, their shingles weathered into a shared, muted palette. A wooden bridge spans the water, its planks worn to smooth curves by feet and hooves, its posts carved with simple patterns that have long since lost their original meaning but stubbornly keep their place. At one end of the bridge, a stone tower rises, square and watchful, its bell chamber open to the air. As you cross into the village, your steps change sound. Grass and dirt give way to packed earth and scattered stones, then to a suggestion of cobbles, set awkwardly and smoothed by use more than design. The cart's wheels thump and rattle, complaining loudly enough to announce your arrival. People turn, not dramatically, no one drops anything or gasps, but in the slow, assessing way of those who live where visitors arrive rarely and always for a reason. A few nods are exchanged, small flickers of recognition passing from face to face, stitching you into the fabric of this moment whether you belong here or not. The market square is not vast, but it feels like the center of a universe. Stalls and carts form rough rows, each one a temporary embassy of some household, some craft, some strip of hillside or patch of riverbank. Tents lean into one another, their canvas patched and repatched, edges flapping softly. Tables sag under the weight of objects that are both everyday and precious. Coils of rope, bundles of wool, iron tools with edges glinting hungrily, stacks of rough linen, pots so solid you could probably fend off both hunger and invaders with them. Food dominates, as it always has and always will wherever humans gather. Blocks of salt, dull, crystalline bricks, more valuable than most of your subscriptions, sit next to sacks of flour and rye. Baskets overflow with apples that still carry the scent of cold mornings, with turnips and cabbages that have never seen a barcode. Honey glows in clay jars, thick and patient, sunlight preserved for use on bitter days. A small corner bristles with luxuries from farther away. Dried figs, a twist of something that might be spice, a bolt of cloth dyed in a color the local plants could never produce, proof that this valley is not as sealed off from the wider world as it sometimes feels. Cowbells and church bells keep up a polite argument over whose authority matters more. From the tower, the deep bell tolls the hour, its slow pulse rolling across the rooftops. From the animals tethered at the edge of the square, smaller bells answer in bright, uncertain notes, jangling whenever a head tosses or a body shifts. Deals are struck in their shadows, measured not by flashing screens or printed receipts, but by the weight of coins in a calloused hand, the heft of goods in a basket, the small, satisfied nod of someone who knows they will eat well in a few days because of this moment. You notice the absence of price tags. There's no neat list taped to any stall, no digital display blinking numbers at you. Value here is a conversation, an assessment of weather, of recent harvests, of rumors from neighboring valleys. It is adjusted by memory. Who was generous last year? Who drove a harder bargain than anyone liked? Who still owes a favor from that bad winter when the snow refused to leave? Your world likes to pretend that numbers are cold, clean facts. Here they are warm, smudged by human relationships, carried in recollections instead of spreadsheets. And yet, despite the stakes, nothing feels frantic. The square hums rather than buzzes. People move at the speed of bodies that know exactly how far they must walk home after this. Children weave between legs and stalls, darting toward anything bright or unusual. Dogs patrol the edges with the seriousness of small officials. Laughter bubbles up now and then, quickly swallowed by the general murmur. Overhead, the sky holds steady in a pale, diffuse blue, clouds stretched thin, not yet threatening. By midday, the cart that rumbled in heavy is lighter of cheese and meat, heavier of grain and salt, and a few carefully chosen items that will make long evenings less bleak. Perhaps a coil of new rope that will not snap at the worst moment, a small knife with a handle that fits a familiar hand, a bright scrap of cloth that does nothing to keep anyone alive but will be worn on some rare day of celebration all the same. These decisions are made without fanfare, but you can feel their weight in the subtle satisfaction that settles over the group as goods are tied down again. When at last the church bell marks the hour for departure, the market does not vanish. It slowly deflates. Stalls are stripped, baskets emptied, conversations wrapped up with a final nod. Carts creak back toward the roads that unwound them here in the morning. The town, briefly inflated with people and possibility, exhales them back into the folds of the valley. You walk with the outbound flow. The cowbells at your side now carry new meaning. They mark not just the presence of animals, but the return of hard-won wealth to the high places where it will be transformed, stored, and guarded against the whims of weather and time. As you step out of the square and onto the ascending path, you glance back once. The tower stands firm, its bell silent for the moment, watching over the emptying space where so much quiet urgency has just unfolded. Ahead, the slope rises again, darker now under a sky that seems to be thinking about a change. The cart tips into its climb, muscles lean into their work, and the cowbells begin a new song for the long way up, one you will follow back to the pasture, unaware that the mountain is already planning the next test it will set for you in the form of wind, cloud, and sudden driving rain. The climb back toward the high pasture begins as repetition. The same bends and stones, the same stretches where your calves burn in that honest, heavy way. The cart is lighter now, but still complains, and the cowbells ahead and behind ring in their usual comforting pattern. For a while, it feels as if the day is simply rewinding itself, playing the journey in reverse. Only the sky refuses to cooperate. Back in the market square, the light was thin but clear. A pale autumn blue stretched over the valley. Now, as you gain height, that blue is being slowly painted over. Clouds spill across the ridges, first as faint smudges, then as thicker bands that darken and join. Color drains from the slopes until everything begins to look like an old photograph left too long in the sun. Wind arrives before the rain, as it often does. It creeps uphill in cold threads, slipping into cuffs and collars, tasting of wet stone and distant water. The air that earlier smelled of grass and wood smoke now carries that faint metallic hint that means, in any century, that you are about to get very wet. Even the cowbells sound different, their notes sharper, clipped short as the gusts snatch them away. The first raindrop is easy to ignore, the second less so. By the time you register the third, the sky has simply committed. Rain thickens from scattered taps into a solid sheet, each drop heavy and confident. Sound explodes around you, a constant hiss and drumming on wool, leather, wood, and stone. In a handful of breaths, you go from, "it might rain," to, "it is raining on every part of my existence." The path changes personality. Dust turns instantly to slick paste, hugging your boots. Stones that felt reliable a moment ago acquire a clear, treacherous shine. Water rushes along the easiest lines downhill, turning ruts into narrow, eager streams that chatter around your ankles. The cart's wheels sink and grind, flinging arcs of mud that paint your clothes in abstract patterns. Any leftover romantic fantasies about simple shepherd life dissolve faster than the first layer of dirt sliding off your coat. The world shrinks. Rain pulls a gray hood over everything so that your universe narrows to a moving bubble. A few steps of path, the closest flanks of the animals, the bobbing curve of their backs. The farmhouse disappears. The valley has been erased. You walk through a damp, echoing space where you still know which way is up and which way is down, but all other distances become guesses. In that narrowed world, the cowbells quietly promote themselves. They stop being background texture and turn into your only reliable map. You can't see far, but you can hear where you belong. Ahead, a low, steady bell marks the animal that knows the path. To one side, a restless higher tone jangles whenever the slope steepens. Behind, a cloud of overlapping midtones tells you the rest of the herd is still there. You find yourself moving according to that music, staying inside its loose circle of sound. Wind hardens and pushes the rain sideways, slapping it into your face, driving it into sleeves and seams. Mud collects around your boots like makeshift ankle weights. Your fingers go numb, your muscles protest. There is no pause button, no option to postpone this climb for a clearer afternoon. Weather does not care about your schedule. It simply is, and you adjust or you don't. The mountain, blunt as always, has you fully in the present moment. Then, as suddenly as it committed, the storm begins to let go. The downpour softens to a steadier patter. Raindrops grow smaller and farther apart, like someone easing their grip on your shoulders. The gray curtain thins enough that shapes seep back into being. The dim line of the upper fence, the hunched outline of the cowshed roof, a small ribbon of smoke stubbornly climbing through the damp air. Through all of this, the cowbells never stopped. Their tones changed, duller under the heaviest bursts, clearer in brief lulls, but they threaded through the storm the whole time, a thin, bright wire of continuity. As the world widens again, you realize you have been unconsciously matching your steps to that sound, staying within its circle like someone walking beneath an invisible umbrella. When your boots finally reach flatter ground, the pasture feels newly washed. Grass lies pressed and gleaming, every blade tipped with a droplet that catches the returning light. Tiny streams chatter along small channels, hurrying downhill with the gossip of the storm. You are soaked, mud-splotched, chilled through, but strangely clean inside. The weather has taken its payment in comfort and given you a rough, effective kind of clarity in exchange. Ahead, the herd shakes themselves, sending arcs of water flying, bells exploding into brief chaos before settling back into their patient clatter. The farmhouse waits with its low roof, its hearth, its stores that have quietly outlasted yet another tantrum from the sky. You follow the sound of the bells toward it, feeling a little smaller and a little steadier, grateful for this lesson in how little you control, and for the stubborn, practical music that led you through the gray, asking nothing from you but one wet step and then another. By the time the herd has settled again, the light is already beginning to fray. The storm has scraped a few hours out of the afternoon without asking anyone's permission, and now the day looks thinner than it should, edges worn, colors muted. Clouds still drag across the higher peaks, sullen and bruised, but the rain has faded into occasional spatters. The sky apparently satisfied with the amount of chaos it has dumped on everyone's plans. You feel the tiredness in your body more clearly now that the immediate effort of the climb is over. Muscles hum with residual strain, clothes cling in damp patches, and your feet carry that heavy, dull ache that promises either a deep sleep or a very long sulk. The pasture glistens with leftover water, every depression turned into a temporary mirror, every rock outlined in dark, wet lines. The cows, sensibly, have gone back to doing exactly what they were doing before the world tried to dissolve: eating. Their bells sound softer again, no longer battered into sharpness by wind, but rolling gently through the clearing evening like a familiar lullaby restarting after an interruption. Near the edge of the grazed area, where the slope tucks inward, as if the mountain is pulling its cloak tighter, a small structure crouches against the rock. You noticed it before, just another hut, you thought, overshadowed by the more impressive bulk of the farmhouse. But now it calls to you with the quiet urgency of a pillow at the end of a long week. Rough timbers form its walls, chinked with moss and mud. The roof is lower than the farmhouse, its shingles heavier, weighted with stones to keep the wind from lifting them in the kind of tantrum you just walked through. A short, crooked chimney jets from one side, puffing intermittent breaths of smoke as if the building itself is catching its wind between gusts. Inside, space is scarce, but used with ruthless practicality. One wall is lined with simple bunks, wooden platforms layered with straw, and thin mattresses that have clearly lost any illusions about luxury. Hooks crowd the other wall, burdened with cloaks, spare shirts, and bits of gear. A shelf holds a few essentials, a small bundle of herbs, a tin cup with a dent that tells its own story, and a knife whose handle has been polished by decades of hands. The center of the hut belongs to the hearth and the lamp. The fire here is humbler than the farmhouse blaze, built for efficiency rather than comfort. A compact bed of coals, a few carefully chosen pieces of wood laid to last the evening without demanding constant attention. Above it hangs a blackened pot, its lid rattling softly when a bubble of steam pushes against it. Nearby, a squat oil lamp burns with a steady, determined flame, its light a warmer cousin of the gray returning from outside. The lamp does not banish the shadows, it simply negotiates a truce with them, carving out a circle of gold where faces, hands, and small tasks can exist without squinting. You peel away damp layers and hang them near the warmth, joining a small forest of steaming cloth. The air becomes a complex mixture of scents, wet wool drying, smoke threading through every fiber, the metallic tang of cooled rainwater, and the promising aroma of whatever is simmering in the pot. Your stomach, which has been stoically quiet through storm and climb, suddenly remembers its existence and lodges a formal complaint. The meal, when it arrives, is almost aggressively simple. Thick slices of dark bread, still holding a trace of the oven's heat. Ladles of stew poured into rough bowls. Potatoes, barley, shreds of some meat that has clearly done its duty in life and is now doing it again. Leaves of something green that managed to survive the short growing season are chopped into the mix, not enough to impress, but enough to remind you that color exists. A wedge of cheese, unmistakably cousin to the wheels you saw aging in the farmhouse, is cut into firm slices and shared around, its flavor a concentrated echo of the pasture itself. You eat with the focused gratitude of someone who has spent the day outdoors. Each mouthful lands with a solidity that your usual rushed meals rarely achieve. There is no garnish, no drizzle, no three-word description involving infused or artisanal. It is just food, honest and blunt, built to refill bodies that have earned it. Your mind, which often insists on wandering through worries even while you eat, is too occupied with chewing and warmth to maintain its usual commentary. This, it turns out, is a surprisingly effective form of mindfulness. Be cold and hungry enough, and you will find the present moment very compelling. Outside, the wind begins another round. It claws at the hut's walls with impatient fingers, looking for gaps, testing the roof's resolve. Rain, thinner now, still flings itself intermittently against the boards in scattered bursts. The structure answers with creaks and low groans, the language of wood negotiating with weather. Each shudder runs through the floorboards and into your bones, reminding you that between you and the elements there is only lumber, stone, and the stubbornness of the people who built this box and keep patching it when the mountain disapproves. Yet the small circle of lamplight remains steady. The fire keeps its red, breathing glow. Hands reach automatically to add a log, to adjust a pot, to nudge a cloak closer to the warmth. No one tries to overpower the storm with noise. There is no frantic attempt to drown it out with chatter or music. Silence here is not emptiness to be filled. It is a shared blanket, stretched over everyone, made thicker by the occasional clink of a spoon, the crackle of sap in the fire, the soft shift of straw as someone resettles on their bunk. Through the walls, the cowbells are faint but present. Their notes arrive dulled, filtered through timber and rain, but still distinct enough to trace rough constellations of movement in your mind. Somewhere out there in the dark and wet, heavy bodies stamp and turn, find comfortable spots, lie down with their own bone-deep exhaustion. The bells tick and talk in no particular order, a messy, organic rhythm that somehow soothes more than any metronomic ticking ever could. You imagine the herd as a ring of quiet planets orbiting this small, fragile hut, their gravity keeping you anchored to this particular patch of earth for the night. As the evening lengthens, the lamplight's flame begins to feel brighter simply because your eyes are growing more tired. Little tasks are finished. A strap is mended with a few decisive stitches. A nick in a tool is filed away. A length of rope is checked and coiled. These are not projects that end in promotions or public recognition. No one is collecting metrics on completion rates. But each small act reduces the number of things that can fail tomorrow, and there is a calm, defiant dignity in that. When you finally stretch out on one of the bunks, the straw crackles and settles around your weight, molding itself into all the soft spots and sore joints you have been quietly ignoring. The blanket is rough against your skin, but warm, smelling of sleep, smoke, and 100 previous nights survived. The fire has been banked low, the lamp turned down so its light pools in a smaller circle, as if the room itself is closing its eyes. The wind continues its negotiations with the walls, but its fury has lost some edge. The rain becomes an irregular tapping, like unhurried fingers on a table. The cowbells outside blur together, their separate notes merging into a soft, chiming wash that rises and falls with the animal's breathing. Your own breath slows to match. Thoughts try to mount their usual rebellion, lists of things you should be doing, regrets, future catastrophes. But in this cramped, smoky hut on a medieval slope, they feel oddly out of place, like someone wearing ceremonial attire to muck out a stable. One by one, they give up and dissolve into the general murmur of the weather. You are left with the simple facts. Your body is tired, the roof is holding, there is warmth enough for the night, and the bells are still ringing. At some point, as the lamplight thins and the hearth glows like a tired eye, you slide over the edge into sleep. The last thing you register is the sound of metal on leather, a lazy swing of a bell as an animal shifts position, and the sense that for this one small stretch of darkness, you are exactly where you need to be, wrapped in rough wool and shared silence, while the mountain keeps its own long, patient watch outside. Morning comes again and again, until you stop bothering to count. Up here on the shoulder of the mountain, days don't arrive in numbered squares. They slide over one another like thin layers of mist in the hollow where you first woke among the cattle. At first, the pasture is nothing but green, an extravagant, almost reckless green that seems sure it will last forever. Each blade of grass stands straight and full, heavy with sap and dew, as if the earth is stretching after months of snow. The herd moves through it in slow motion, heads dipping, bells chiming in lazy arcs. You walk with them, your own steps light, lungs working but not yet straining. On some days, clouds float high and harmless, casting soft shadows that drift like thoughts across the slope. On others, the sky holds a theatrical blue so pure it makes your tired city memories feel counterfeit. The sun presses on the back of your neck as you guide the animals from one patch to the next, never letting them chew any place down to desperation. The pasture is a shared savings account, and everyone here understands compound interest in the language of grass. Time is measured less by numbers and more by patterns. You learn the sequence. The first tiny yellow flower that always appears near the rocks. The week when the taller purple stalks lean just enough to brush your calves. The morning when the stream beside the hut shrinks from quicksilver chatter to a quieter, more careful trickle. These markers matter more than any printed date. They tell you how generous the season has decided to be. High summer arrives without announcement, just a saturation of everything. Grass reaches its fullest height, thick and lush, brushing your knees as you walk. The pasture hums with insects, the air buzzing like a low, living instrument. Hay is cut and turned. For a brief time, the hillside becomes a pattern of pale, fragrant rose laid out to dry under a sky so bright it feels almost indecent. You feel the weight of harvest in your muscles, the lifting, bundling, stacking of fodder that will stand between the herd and hunger when the world freezes. Each load carried to the loft above the farmhouse is a small, defiant statement against winter. Your shoulders ache, your hands blister, your back complains, but the smell of drying hay, a mixture of sun, chlorophyll, and something sweet you can't name, wraps around your effort like encouragement. Cowbells drift in from the pasture, a distant chiming metronome that keeps you moving. And then, almost imperceptibly, the turn begins. The green loses a little of its intensity, as if someone has dialed down the saturation. Flowers close and vanish one species at a time, leaving behind seed heads that rattle softly in the afternoon breeze. The air feels different on your skin, still warm in the sun, but with cool threads woven through it, like the first hint of ice in a stream that is still liquid. Mornings arrive with a thin veil of chill that lingers longer on the grass. You see your breath again, faintly at first, then more clearly as the weeks stack themselves. Dew thickens toward frost, forming delicate crystals along fence rails and bucket rims. The herd's breath stands out in thicker plumes, and the bells sound sharper against the thinning air, each strike a reminder that the season is gently but firmly closing its hand. The pasture shifts from green to gold, then to a more subdued brown. Stalks grow brittle and whisper underfoot. Patches that were rich and forgiving become sparse, and you learn to steer the herd with more care, taking what is needed without stripping the hillside bare. Down in the valley, fields lie mottled with stubble. Stacks of firewood rise against house walls, and smoke thickens as evenings shorten. You feel the turn in your own body. The restless energy of early summer has burned away, replaced by a steadier, more grounded strength, part muscle, part habit. Your stride has adjusted to the slopes so thoroughly that flat ground now feels suspicious. Your sleep, when it comes, drops you faster and deeper. Worries that once felt enormous now seem more like weather, sometimes heavy, sometimes light, always moving through. Eventually, frost stops being a rare, pretty visitor and becomes a regular, slightly unwelcome neighbor. It glitters along the grass, crunches under boots, and melts reluctantly in the weak noon sun. The herd's coats thicken, their movements grow slower, their bells lower and more deliberate. The hut and farmhouse take on a new importance, not just as places to eat and rest, but as storehouses of captured sunlight in the form of hay, grain, and cheese. One morning you step outside and realize that the pasture you first met in, lush green, has become something entirely else: gold, brown, silver, the colors of endurance rather than abundance. And yet the cowbells still ring, bright and stubborn, threading through the cold like a reminder that life has no intention of surrendering just because the year has decided to turn. Up here, the seasons revolve with the angle of the light, the thickness of your breath, and the slow migration of the herd circling the ridge, their bells quietly counting off the year in patient, chiming beats. So when one thinning morning the pattern is wrong, you feel it before you fully understand it. The year has already tipped toward its colder half. Frost rims the edges of puddles, grass crackles faintly under your boots, and the light comes in sideways, weaker, as if it has other places it would rather be. The herd moves out as usual, a slow procession of familiar backs and horns and swinging bells. You walk with them, breath white in the air, ears tuned to the now familiar score of their movement. Except something in that score falters. At first, it is just a small absence, like a missing instrument in an orchestra you have heard every day. The deeper bells toll as the older cows trudge forward. The medium tones chime as the steady, middle-aged bodies spread out to graze. The highest, most eager notes, those usually attached to the younger, more chaotic lives, sound thinner, less insistent. You keep expecting one particular bright, slightly frantic ring to join the others, and it simply does not. The slope chosen for today sits higher and steeper, a late-season gamble to make use of grass that clings stubbornly to the more precarious angles of the mountain. The herd fans out in a cautious arc, noses down, hooves testing the ground. Thin soil slides easily here. Rocks loosen with little provocation. Human feet pick their way more carefully, body weight angled just so to keep balance. This is not the soft, generous pasture of early summer. This is the leftover, the fringe, the "we're not wasting that" territory, where any misstep carries a sharper consequence. As the animals settle, you scan the herd the way you might scan a crowded screen for one particular notification. Your gaze passes over sturdy bodies you recognize, counts horns and hides almost without thinking. A faint, restless note nags at the back of your mind. Someone is missing. The realization arrives the instant you see the gap where a small, light-colored shape should be. The calf that has lately taken to charging ahead of everyone else, as if trying to outrun the oncoming winter. It is not here. The mood shifts in a way anyone could feel even without understanding the stakes. Bodies stiffen, movement becomes more deliberate. Worry settles over the group like a new kind of weather, silent, heavy, unavoidable. No one panics. Panic is a luxury people who live on slopes cannot afford. Instead, everything narrows around a simple, unignorable fact. A young creature, not yet seasoned enough to understand the mountain's tricks, is somewhere on this incline, alone. You join the search because there is no version of you in any century that could stand still in that moment. Eyes turn first to the obvious places, the gentler dip of the pasture where calves usually linger, the edges of the herd where the more independent spirits like to test the boundaries of permission. The missing bell does not answer from there. The slope must be read now, not just walked. Every mark in the ground becomes a line in a story you are trying to reconstruct. You begin to see how much information the earth has been politely holding all this time. Hoof prints overlap in messy layers. Some are deep and rounded, others light and hurried. Scuffed patches show where bodies have paused, turned, or stumbled. Grass lies pressed in different directions, a diagram of choices made without maps. The calf's tracks are smaller, more delicate. Once someone points out the pattern, you can follow it. Neat, shallow prints cutting away from the main group, angling toward a patch of particularly tempting grass that leans over the edge of a steeper drop. It is exactly the sort of impulsive detour your own brain takes toward distractions on long days, except this one carries more immediate risk than "I accidentally scrolled for half an hour." The ground here changes texture. Soil thins further, giving way to a skin of loose stones that shiver underfoot. Your weight sends a few clattering downward, each bounce loud against the muted air. Below, the slope tumbles away faster than your stomach would like. You move with deliberate care, placing each step as if you are answering a test question that actually matters. You listen. Rain and wind have left for now, but the mountain is never truly silent. Far off, the rest of the herd works over the safer grass, their bells forming a steady background drone. Closer by, you strain for something else. The sharp, lighter clink of a smaller bell, detached from the herd's cord, echoing where it should not. It comes at last, faint and intermittent, from farther down than you would prefer. The sound bounces strangely off rock, making direction a treacherous guess. You adjust your position, shifting a few meters along the slope, wait for the bell to ring again, refine your mental map. The process repeats: step, listen, correct, breathe, until you are no longer thinking about anything except the next foothold and the next hint of metal on metal in the cold air. Eventually, the ground folds into a shallow ledge, hidden from above by a jutting rock. There, huddled in a cramped pocket of grass, stands the calf. Its sides heave with quick, anxious breaths. Its small hooves are planted too close to the slope's break, toes flirting with a drop that would not be forgiving. The rope of its bell strap is tangled in a low, scrubby bush, just tight enough to prevent backward retreat. The bright, high bell that has been punctuating your mornings now marks the exact boundary between stuck and safe. You feel the way your own body mirrors the calf's tension. Shoulders tight, breath shallow, weight pitched forward. This is what your nervous system does every time you scroll past some crisis you can do nothing about. The difference is that here, you can help. Not with grand heroics, not with dramatic rescues that would play well in a highlight reel, but with small, carefully measured movements. Approach from the side, where the ground holds better. Test each step before committing your weight. Keep your center of gravity close to the hillside. These are not metaphors. They are literal instructions whispered by the mountain through years of lived experience. A hand reaches the calf's flank, steady and reassuring. Another works at the tangle of rope, fingers numb but sure. For a moment, everything balances on the edge of a misstep and its consequences. Then the loop gives, the strap loosens, and the calf takes a stumbling, blessedly backward step toward safer ground. The bell rings loud and clear in that instant, a bright, almost giddy note that bounces off stone and into your ribs. Your breath, which had been wound tight inside you, releases in a long, invisible sigh. The calf scrambles up the ledge, pushed and guided, hooves finding purchase where a moment ago they only found fear. The return to the herd feels longer than the descent, even though the distance is the same. Each step upward is careful, deliberate, protective. The calf stays close, its bell chiming in short, uneven bursts, as if it is still arguing with gravity. When the first of the older animals comes into view, head lifting, ears flicking, you feel something inside you unknot that you did not realize was twisted. The reunion is not dramatic, at least not in ways your century would recognize. There are no hugs, no sweeping music, no slow-motion montage. The calf simply slots back into the moving pattern of bodies and bells as if the herd is a sentence that has just recovered its missing word. Yet the atmosphere shifts, a softening along shoulders, a loosening in the air. Worry withdraws the way a tide does, slowly, leaving behind only damp sand and a few scattered reminders of what could have been. The path toward the chapel begins where the pasture thins and the last confident sweeps of grass give up their hold on the slope. For days you have half noticed the pale shape above the tree line, always in the corner of your vision, like a thought you keep meaning to finish. Today, with the herd settled lower down and the air holding that brittle clarity that means winter is close, you finally follow the faint trail that threads upward. Your boots leave the softness of earth and meet looser stone. Pebbles slide and rattle under your feet, dropping away with tiny, echoing clatters. The pasture shrinks behind you into a worn patch of brown and green, the huts and farmhouse huddled close, smoke rising in thin, practical ribbons. Trees cling to the slope longer than seems reasonable, dark shapes gripping cracks with stubborn roots. Their needles whisper as the wind moves through, carrying the resin-sweet smell of sap and old storms. You pass the last of them, a crooked pine that looks more like a question mark than a tree, and step into a zone that belongs almost entirely to rock and sky. The ground here is bare in places, scraped by weather into ribs and ledges. The sky feels larger, the air thinner, your breath louder in your own ears. Whatever noise you usually carry inside your skull grows quieter, bullied into the background by the simple need to place each foot carefully and stay upright. The chapel gathers out of this starkness with a kind of quiet inevitability. First you see the squared edge of a wall, then the steep fall of a roof, then the whole small building, perched on a ledge as if the mountain has cupped its palm to hold it. It is not ornate and not cute. Rough stones, only roughly shaped, are stacked into walls thick enough to keep out both weather and doubt. A steep timber roof leans into the prevailing wind, its shingles held down with fist-sized rocks. A narrow window blinks a dull, clouded eye. The door is a bleached plank slab, scarred by years of hands that have pushed it open in every mood a human being can bring up this far. Low stone steps lead to the threshold, their centers hollowed and smoothed by centuries of ascent and retreat. A bell hangs in a simple timber frame at one corner, its metal dulled by storms. It is not like the cowbells below. Its lines are cleaner, its mouth wider. When a stray gust nudges it, the sound that rings out is higher and clearer, meant for people rather than animals. You can imagine that tone drifting down through snow and mist, telling whoever hears it that someone, somewhere on this mountain, is awake and paying attention. Standing beside it, you feel the easy, practical music of the pasture fall into the background, replaced by a thinner, more vertical sense of sound that wants to climb. Inside, light falls away and then rearranges itself. The room is small and plain, cooler than the air outside, but mercifully still. 2 short rows of benches squat on either side of a narrow aisle, surfaces darkened and smoothed by the weight of damp cloaks and folded hands. In some places, the floor is bare rock, worn shiny where feet have chosen the same route again and again. In others, thin woven mats lie like faded islands. At the far end, a simple wooden table serves as an altar, holding nothing grander than a carved cross and a few stubs of candle, their sides hardened into crooked rivers of wax. The walls close in without feeling suffocating, more like a pair of cupped hands around a wavering flame. You sit, because staying on your feet feels unnecessarily formal in a room that has clearly hosted more exhaustion than ceremony. The silence here differs from the silence of the hut or the pasture. Outside, quiet is always braided with motion, the breath of cattle, the scrape of hooves, the slide of wind. Here, the stillness feels contained, as if the stone itself has decided to listen. Your own noises grow suspiciously loud. The soft rustle of cloth, the faint knock of your boot against the bench, the measured in and out of your breathing. Thoughts line up, eager to rehearse all the usual worries, but they look oddly theatrical in this cramped, unadorned space, like overdressed guests who have turned up at the wrong kind of gathering. This chapel has stored different fears. Its walls have heard the kind of prayers that come when a harvest fails, when a fever burns, when snow keeps falling long after it should have stopped. Against that backdrop, your modern catastrophes shrink a little, revealed as weather of the mind rather than laws of nature. You notice the marks left by other lives, initials carved near the door, some already blurred by time, a faint horizontal scratch that might mark the height of snow in some legendary year, wax dripped and frozen along a bench where candles once burned longer than planned. The building is small, but the weight of all those nights and mornings makes it feel strangely wide in the direction of time, like a corridor opening backward into generations. Outside, wind presses at the stone in restless wandering gusts, wrapping itself around corners, testing for seams and finding none that matter. Somewhere far below, cowbells send up a softened echo of the day's work. Their notes reach the chapel as thin, patient ghosts of sound, just enough to remind you that life is still moving out there. Animals grazing, fires being coaxed to life, hands closing doors against the coming cold. Up here, the line between practical work and whatever you might call prayer feels narrow. A life spent wrestling slopes and weather leaves little room for fancy philosophies. Any plea uttered in this room would have been brief, blunt, and sincere. When you finally rise, joints stiff from the chill, The light through the small window has tilted toward late afternoon. You step back outside into air that tastes even clearer after the stillness. On impulse more than intention, you reach up and set the bell moving. Its tone arcs out in a bright, clean ring that seems to hang in the cold for a heartbeat longer than it should, weaving for a moment with the distant, earthier clank of cowbells below. For that instant, chapel, pasture, huts, herd, and the tired and complicated person standing between centuries are stitched together by sound. Then the note thins and is gone, carried off by wind and distance. You turn your back on the stone walls and pick your way down toward the familiar shapes of grass and wood. With each step, the cowbells swell from faint suggestion into full chorus again, drawing you back toward the world of milk and mud and small necessary chores. You carry no relic from the chapel, no token to hang on a wall, only a quieter understanding of how small you are against the mountain and how strangely kind it feels that the mountain already knows that and lets you stay anyway. The days fold over one another until they lose their sharp edges, like stones tumbled together in a river. At some point, you stop trying to remember whether the milking you watched was yesterday or last week, whether that particular storm was 3 days ago or 5. The pasture, the huts, the chapel, the village, they all start to feel less like separate places and more like different rooms in the same long, breathing house. You wake to cowbells and fall asleep to cowbells, and in between you follow their various moods. Morning bells are brisk, purposeful, marking the transition from sleep to work. Midday bells are looser, a lazy chiming scattered over the slope as animals drift and chew and occasionally argue with gravity. Evening bells are lower, slower, a heavy clanking lullaby as bodies find their resting places and shift one last time. The pattern repeats so often it threads itself into your nervous system, smoothing out the frayed wires your own century left tangled. The more you listen, the more you realize that the bells are not just noise. They are a language. They say, "We are here." They say, "This is where the herd ends." They say, "Something moved over there. Pay attention." On stormy days, their notes sharpen and cluster, warning of panic or confusion. On clear days, the sound spreads thin and relaxed, each ring a small, contented exhale. Without anyone giving you a crash course in medieval cowbell semantics, you gradually learn to tell the difference between just grazing and something is wrong, between bored calf and animal stuck where it should not be. Once, as you sit on a smooth rock watching the herd, your mind does that annoying thing where it tries to open a new mental tab. It flashes you an image of your phone at home, screen lighting up, a dozen different pings and buzzes demanding attention. You remember how carefully you tuned them. One sound for messages, another for emails, another for social apps. A tiny digital zoo of chirps and chimes you trained yourself to understand. For years, you let those noises tell you where to look, what to worry about, who to answer first. Up here, the bells do something similar, but with a crucial difference. They are not trying to sell you anything. They are not designed to be addictive. They are simply truthful. An animal moves, and the bell rings. An animal stops, and the bell falls silent. There is no manipulation in it, no urgent red badges stacking up in a corner of your vision. The bells ask nothing of you that is not actually happening. It is unsettling, in a good way, to realize how much of your usual stress comes from being called to imaginary emergencies all day. As the season leans further into cold, the sounds of the valley shift along with the light. River water, swollen and loud in spring, now runs lower, its voice pitched softer under thin rims of forming ice. Wood smoke thickens and sinks, muffling the sounds of axes and voices in the village below. From the chapel, the occasional ring of its higher, clearer bell drifts down, marking a service or a burial or some quiet milestone known only to the people who climbed up there in wind and doubt. Sometimes in the evenings, when work is done and the hut is warm enough that your fingers no longer feel like carved wood, you close your eyes and simply listen. Without sight to anchor you, time loosens. The creak of timbers, the crackle of the hearth, the soft clank of a bell outside. None of these sounds care what year it is. They could belong to a century before or after this one, and you would not be able to tell. Your own life, with its glowing rectangles and relentless updates, seems suddenly like a strange specific experiment, not the default state of existence. It occurs to you with the kind of slow, amused realization that only comes when you are truly tired that somebody in some future might lie awake listening to entirely different machines and think of them as inevitable. Maybe distant engines, maybe humming circuits, maybe something you cannot even picture. But the core experience of lying in the dark, listening for familiar sounds to reassure you that the world is still more or less intact, is probably the same. Humans have always measured safety by what they hear in the night. Dogs still breathing, wind still outside the walls, bells still ringing where they should. You think of all the people who have stood on this pasture before you, hands numb, noses running, eyes stinging from smoke or cold or both. Their worries would have been sharp and specific. Will the calf survive? Will the snow come early? Will there be enough grain? Yours tend to be more abstract and multi-tiered. Am I behind? Am I enough? Why did I say that thing 3 years ago? But in the dark, listening for bells, both kinds of anxiety boil down to the same craving. Tell me I'm not alone out here. The bells answer in their own uncomplicated way. They never promise that things will be easy, or that storms will politely avoid market days. They simply declare presence, metal on leather, mass on slope, life moving through space. Even when you finally drift toward sleep, mind fuzzed at the edges, you carry their rhythm down with you, like a song stuck in your head, except it actually helps. Your breathing syncs with some steady pattern outside yourself, and for a little while, the part of you that is always on high alert gets to stand down. Some nights you feel the centuries blur even more. You are aware of your real body lying in a very different room and a very different time, while another version of you huddles under rough wool in the shepherd's hut. The two overlap for a moment, like two layers of tracing paper. On one, the glow of a screen. On the other, the orange flicker of a hearth. On one, the quiet buzz of traffic. On the other, the hollow clank of bells. Your brain, astonishingly adaptable creature that it is, decides that both can be true and stops arguing. In that overlap, the cowbells become something more than medieval livestock management. They turn into anchors, tying your restless, over-caffeinated present to an older, slower rhythm that does not particularly care how many emails are in your inbox. Each ring is a tiny, chiming reminder that there have been other ways to live, other measures of a good day long before you arrived, and long after you are gone. And as the season slides toward its close, as frost thickens and the herd begins to edge lower down for winter, you find that when you picture home, it is no longer just four walls and a bed and the familiar glow of your devices. Home has expanded to include this slope, these huts, that chapel, this steady, persistent sound of bells moving through cold air. You don't know it yet, but soon those bells will guide you back across the invisible line between centuries, leading you gently downhill toward your own bed, where their echo will still be ringing softly in your chest. The night comes on so gradually that you almost miss the moment when the world tips from dim to dark. All day the light has been thin, stretching itself across the pasture like a worn blanket. Now it finally gives up, folding itself along the ridges and draining down into the valley. What remains is a soft, lingering blue that deepens with every breath you take. The herd has already drifted to its chosen resting places, bodies settling with the heavy, satisfied sighs of creatures who have done exactly enough for one day and no more. You stand a little apart, on a small rise where the grass still holds the memory of summer in its flattened, rustling blades. Frost has not quite settled yet, but the air has that metallic edge that tells you it is circling. Above, the sky clears with surprising speed, as if the mountain has politely asked the clouds to leave so that the stars can have their turn. One by one they appear, not the timid, washed-out specks you're used to seeing between streetlights, but sharp, insistent points scattered across a wide, dark bowl. Moonlight follows, climbing slowly over the jagged lip of the ridge. It spills onto the pasture in a pale, deliberate flood, turning every wet blade of grass into a narrow, silver naddle. Rocks gleam like buried coins. The roofs of the farmhouse and hut glow faintly, their edges softened. The animals become pale humps in the half-dark, outlined in a cool halo where the light touches their backs. The world, which has spent all day being practical, mud, work, food, cold, suddenly remembers that it can also be quietly beautiful without asking anyone's permission. The cowbells, which never fully stopped, adapt to the night shift. Their ringing is sparser now, separated by long stretches of stillness. A head turns here, a leg stretches there, a body resettles in the hollow it has claimed. Each small adjustment sends a note into the air, a soft clank, a hollow tap, a brief, high chime. They do not form a melody so much as a constellation of sound points, scattered over the slope like the stars overhead. You begin to walk, not because there is anything left to do, but because some part of you understands that this is the last time tonight you will cross this pasture awake. Your steps sink softly into the moonlit grass, leaving no mark anyone will notice in the morning. The air presses cold against your face, drying the sweat at your collar, making your breath visible in small, ghostly puffs that drift away and vanish. As you move, the landscape arranges itself into a kind of farewell tour. There, the patched roof of the shepherd's hut, still holding the memory of lamplight and stew and rough blankets that smelled of smoke and stubborn survival. Beyond it, the darker mass of the farmhouse, inside which cheeses age in the quiet, wheels of stored sunlight waiting for deep winter. Off to one side, just visible against the sky's paler band, the outline of the chapel crouches on its ledge, the bell above it, still and waiting for some future need. You feel all these places in your body as much as you see them. the ache in your legs that remembers the climb to the chapel, the soreness in your shoulders that remembers hauling hay, the tenderness in your knees that remembers picking your way across loose stones in search of a missing calf. Bits of weather cling to you too. The sting of storm rain, the dryness of high summer heat, the prickling bite of early frost. The mountain has not just been a backdrop, it has been steadily, quietly editing the way you move, the way you breathe, the way you pay attention. The bells follow you, or you follow them. At this point, it hardly matters which. A deeper tone marks the heavy elder cows lying nearer the fence. Farther off, a lighter chime rings from the calf that once stood frozen on a dangerous ledge and now sleeps with all the aggressive innocence of someone who has already forgotten how close things came to going wrong. Their sounds layer together in gently shifting patterns, and you realize, with a wry sort of softness, that this is the only notification system you trust right now. Nothing here is trying to hijack your attention. It just announces what exists: weight, movement, life. You walk until you reach the edge of the pasture where rock begins to win the argument with soil. The path downward waits in its familiar curve, the same route you took up from the valley what feels like a lifetime ago. Moonlight slides along it like spilled milk, filling every shallow track and hollowed footprint with pale glow. For a moment you stand between two directions, up toward huts and chapel and the simple economy of grass and milk, down toward a village, a distant sentry, and eventually your own bed, where your phone is probably still sulking on a nightstand. The bells make the decision for you in their own way. A particularly clear note rings from above, one of the older cows shifting, claiming her preferred angle of slope before sleep. The sound arcs over your head, then seems to keep going, thinning but not quite vanishing, stretching into a distance that feels neither medieval nor modern, just wide. You realize that you are not being dismissed from this place. You are being walked to the door like a guest who stayed late but is still welcome to come back in stories and dreams. So you step onto the path, and the ground tilts gently beneath you. Each footfall carries you farther downhill, even as some other part of you remains on the ridge, cataloging the way moonlight silvers the backs of resting animals, the way frost begins to steal over the grass, the way the little hut huddles against the slope as if listening to the mountain breathe. The world around you blurs, not into danger this time the way it did in the storm, but into softness. Edges smear, shapes simplify. Cowbells stretch into long, chiming threads that twist together, then slowly untwist into something else. By the time you notice, the slope beneath your feet has become flat flooring. The smell of smoke and cold stone has faded into whatever your room smells like at night: fabric, dust, maybe the faint echo of something you ate hours ago and forgot about. The silvered grass has folded itself into the familiar dark of your blankets. Above you, the sky of sharp stars and patient moon softens into the plain, ordinary ceiling you live under. The cowbells, still ringing somewhere inside your chest, settle finally into the slow, steady rhythm of your own breathing. You are home, in your own time, in your own bed. Yet the pasture has not let go of you completely. It lingers as an afterimage behind your eyes and a gentle weight in your limbs. The sense that there is a world where attention is given to weather, grass, and the honest work of keeping living things alive through hard seasons. You carry back with you the quiet understanding that not every sound deserves your anxiety, and not every movement needs an instant response. Some bells you can let ring and fade. Some you can listen to without jumping. And as you lie there, drifting toward sleep, the last thing you feel is that soft, chiming reassurance following you down. You are here. You are not alone on the slope. The night is wide, but not empty. And somewhere, in a pasture you can reach whenever you close your eyes, the cows have settled, the storm has passed, and the mountain is content to watch over you both. The wind down. You let the story loosen its fingers from your shoulders very slowly, the way someone might ease a heavy coat from your back after a long day. The images that were so sharp a moment ago begin to blur at their edges. Moonlight on wet grass, a hut's small window glowing in the dark, the faint outline of a chapel nestled against stone. They do not vanish, they simply move a little farther away, like lights along a road you have already walked. Your breathing lengthens without you forcing it, each inhale drifting a touch deeper, each exhale stretching a little longer, as if your body has finally remembered how to be on your side. Muscles that have been clenching themselves into knots for days begin to unwind one by one. Your jaw, your shoulders, the small, stubborn line between your eyebrows that tries so hard to manage the universe. None of it is needed right now. The pasture is tended. The herd is safe. The mountain is not asking anything of you. Somewhere in the quiet, you still hear a faint echo of cowbells, softer than before, like a memory of rain, rather than rain itself. They do not pull at you anymore. They keep a gentle watch from the distance, a reminder that there are places where life moves at the speed of footsteps and seasons, not alerts and deadlines. You are allowed, just for these few hours, to borrow that pace. Thoughts may still wander through, holding up small anxieties like persistent salespeople. You do not have to wrestle them. You can let them drift past like clouds sliding over a mountain that has no intention of going anywhere. You are that mountain tonight, solid, quiet, allowed to simply exist while the sky rearranges itself overhead. If your eyes feel heavy, you can let them be heavy. If your mind starts to fuzz at the edges, you can let it. Nothing important depends on you staying sharp right now. The path down from the pasture has already been walked. All that remains is to rest at the bottom of it. So you sink a little deeper into wherever you are lying. You notice the reassuring weight of your own body, the surface holding you up without complaint, the air slipping in and out of your lungs without needing permission. The day, with all its noise and negotiations, moves gently behind you. Ahead, there is only darkness in the best possible way. Quiet, soft, undemanding. You are allowed to fall asleep now, carrying with you only what is light. A fragment of moonlit grass, the hush of a small hut in the storm, the distant, steady ringing of bells that mean nothing more complicated than this. You are safe enough to rest. End of story. Sweet dreams.